Coming up on this week's show are some legendary companies coming back from the dead.
The most impressive Game Boy Advance game ever.
And we get the inside story from Sega Europe with Nick Alexander.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each week with our amazing friends at Bitmap Books. Now check out Atari 2600 and 7800, a visual compendium, celebrating the look of the company that kickstarted the video game industry back in the 70s and dominated it for the next decade. All the details and the rest of their retro gaming books are at bitmapbooks.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 310, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And it's our favourite time of the week again, just before the weekend when we get to completely nerd out about classic video games and, of course, take you behind the scenes on the industry that shaped us as people. I think it's fair to say that video games are a massive part of our lives, aren't they?
Absolutely, 100%. When you said it then, when you said it shaped us as people, it really did. Like, I joke sometimes that I was brought up by my Mega Drive or by my GameCube, and I really do stand by that. So it 100% shaped me. So if that's how you feel about games, then this is the place to be. The Retro Hour is.
I still sit in the dark, curtains
Exactly.
closed, playing games, like middle-aged. It definitely shaped me.
You know what, though, because obviously the world's been all over the place over the last couple of years, but actually there is something nice, isn't there, about, just kind of shutting the news off, like you said, turning the lights off, drawing the curtains, and suddenly booting up your Mega Drive or your Super Nintendo, and all of a sudden, you're 12 years old again, and all the worries in the world are just gone, aren't they?
100 million %. Just turning off any sort of, your modern devices and stuff and just shutting in with a bit of Sonic the Hedgehog, that's for me, that's therapy.
And also, like modern games, I tend to get beaten by 12-year-olds. So it's kind of good to play the retro ones where it's me by myself.
Well, one thing I love about doing this podcast, and, I think this is really where we excel, when we get the stories from people who were actually there at the time. And, I love it when we get, stories from people who are actually running the show. Because today we're going to be joined by a chap called Nick Alexander. Now, Nick, an absolute legend. Not only was he the pretty much the guy that set up Virgin Games with Richard Branson back in the 80s, but then he was the ex-CEO of Sega Europe as well. So this is such an interesting chat, and I don't think Nick's ever done a podcast before, so actually this is stuff that you might not have heard before, because, we hear a lot about Sega, but generally it's always from the American or the Japanese perspective, isn't it? You don't really hear much about what happened in Europe and the UK in particular back in the heyday.
Yeah, it's very, very Sega of America focused, and like a lot of guests that we've had previously have been Sega of America. And you actually did this one solo, Dan, as well. So, usually I join you for an interview, but technically we couldn't. So I'm actually really looking forward to hearing what this one's about and kind of hearing the whole thing, like when the show comes out.
Yeah, I mean, I can't ourselves lucky that, in 310 episodes, generally getting guests online and everything, it's been completely fine. We did have a bit of a technical nightmare with Nick for some reason. All the systems we normally use just weren't playing ball. So in the end, after about an hour of messing around, I said, look, I'm just going to ring you on the phone. So we did it that way. I did it on the phone with him. So the quality might not be, the usual high fidelity that you get from this show, we'd like to think. But, it's kind of like listening to, a caller on the radio, really.
So it makes it retro.
Exactly, yeah. It's like old school radio.
It's got that nice
aesthetic,
it's like, yeah.
And it's definitely worth persevering as well, so you can hear those stories. I mean, because I kind of said to him, because he was there at like the time when it was, a really important time for Sega. He was there when the Master System was on the market, and then obviously he had the job of launching the Mega Drive. And also, I talked to him about the launches of Sonic 2, Sonic Tuesday, how they coordinated that campaign globally, and also kind of got into what he thought about, the Mega CD and the 32X and the challenges of being there at the time when, I mentioned to Nick in the interview that I remember hearing and, in magazines and on TV shows like Games Master, when the 32X was coming out, the Sega Saturn was already about to be launched in Japan. So that must have been a hard job actually kind of selling the buzz on that as well, when everyone knew the next big thing was coming along. And we chat about stuff like, Night Trap and those kind of games that came out on the Mega CD, and just a really good chat about what the industry was like in that really exciting time for Sega. So really, really think you're going to enjoy this week's guest, Nick Alexander. He's on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, there's lots of news stories to get into. Should we just plough straight into the news this week? Because this has been absolutely everywhere. It seems like the week when, I guess maybe it's a thing that happens at the start of the year, but a lot of trademarks seem to have been renewed over the last couple of weeks. Now, not only have we been sent these from, so many people. I've been tagged on Twitter, people have posted it on Discord, sent us it on Facebook. I've even seen it on, sites like Games Radar and Game Rant and stuff too, covering this, that two companies who we'll be very familiar with from back in the day that were acquired by other companies have now had their trademarks renewed. And this is Sony has renewed the trademark for Psygnosis, and Atari has filed a trademark renewal for Ocean.
I think with the Ocean one, it's a hard one. I don't want to be negative or anything like that. With the Ocean one, it could just be Atari own them. They own the rights, they own the logos, so they're just doing the, like you say, the yearly renewal or the 5-yearly renewal. But with the Sony and Psygnosis one, it could be that, or it could be something is coming on the horizon because of, Psygnosis became, is it Studio Liverpool?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I obviously don't know how copyrights work and stuff like that, but for them to actually renew the license for Psygnosis, and apparently some people have done some digging, they've done it for the logo as well, for the old Psygnosis owl rendered logo, the owl and everything. So it could be nothing. I think people want it to be something, are we getting a new Lemmings or something? But I don't know. I honestly don't know. But if I had to put money on it, I would say it's just the general housekeeping. But if I really wanted to play detective, I feel like there could be something there with Psygnosis, maybe.
Well, they did that Shadow of the Beast release on the PlayStation, didn't they? And that was one of Psygnosis's, like the modern remake, and that was like one of Psygnosis's main brands. So there still seems to be like an interest there in regards to Sony. I think personally, I think I was a bit annoyed, and everybody was, when they kind of killed off Psygnosis, because they had that nice kind of transition where they went over to the PlayStation and they did those like early PlayStation titles, and there was some,
a Wipeout.
Yeah. That was some absolutely legendary. Imagine how many systems that sold. So I don't know if they still regard it as a big asset and maybe kind of turn it into Studio Liverpool. I thought Studio Liverpool was going to be like Rockstar North or something. It was going to have that kind of huge identity and go and make groundbreaking stuff, and then it all kind of like just died off. I really do hope they do something, and they kind of, even if it's just re-releasing some of the PlayStation classics on the new machines, like, with a nice kind of remaster or something. I just think it's such an iconic brand. It's just got that kind of European gaming association, hasn't it? That other people might not see as such a big market.
I know. Whenever we go to events and that, you're normally rocking a Psygnosis T-shirt.
I've got a Psygnosis car sticker. Right, this is amazing. I haven't got a car. Yeah, I'm such a fan. I've got the car sticker, so when I do get one, I'm going to stick it in the window.
That's brilliant. That is. I ain't got a car, but I've got a car sticker,
and it's the owl as well. It's so good.
Oh, that is such an iconic logo, isn't it? Obviously, and actually, I've been seeing these stories posted everywhere over the last couple of days. And actually, there was quite a big discussion thread on one of the Amiga Facebook groups. People in there going, "It's outrageous that Lemmings is not on modern platforms, and they should release it on the iPhone and the iPad." And then someone actually screenshotted it that it's been on there for 3 years on the App Store. It just obviously no one really noticed, but obviously it goes under the Sony brand these days. But I mean, we'll talk more about this in a second, because there's some interesting developments with backward compatibility that Sony are doing at the moment. And we've heard these, well, not really rumors, we know they're working on it. It's kind of a competitor they're doing to Xbox Game Pass, where they're going to be, I've heard that they're going to be putting a load of old titles on there as well. So maybe they're looking, regarding their back catalogue has been a bit more important than it used to. So maybe they're going to kind of trade in on that nostalgia by maybe putting the Psygnosis logo, in front of maybe some games that had it originally, like Wipeout and Lemmings and stuff like that.
Well, they pushed Wipeout a lot, didn't they? They had like Wipeout Pure, Wipeout Pulse, Wipeout HD. So they kept pushing on Wipeout quite a lot. I think that's all that Studio Liverpool did at one point, Wipeout games.
I think what you've just said there, Dan, is probably, I didn't even think ahead there, and like you say, it fits in nicely with our next story about backwards compatibility. But yeah, I think now you've just kind of thrown that into the ring. I think it could be that, a little bit like on like Netflix or Disney Plus, where it's like, you kind of click on, what genre or whatever, and it could be something like that. You click on Psygnosis, and now it's like, okay, here are all the Psygnosis games or something. That would be really nice. So it could be
like the greatest hits kind of thing.
Yeah. So that would be really cool if they had something like that.
In terms of Ocean, this is a bit more unknown to me because we know just kind of how wacky and out there and unpredictable current day Atari is. They could have anything planned for this. I mean, again, it could just be the fact that they own this trademark, and if they don't protect it, then it lapses and someone else could use it, which I think is probably the most likely possibility. But if you'd have asked me, 2 or 3 years ago, will Atari release a new console called the VCS in the styling of the original again, I'd have been like, no chance. But, it could be anything, I think, with modern day Atari. Maybe they're going to be building the Ocean cryptocurrency or the Ocean Hotel in Las Vegas or something.
It could be something like that. Or it could be something to do with the VCS, with the games on there. Some of them could be Ocean games, maybe. I'm not too sure.
They also had a little tiny legacy of PlayStation games as well, didn't they, Ocean? So they just kind of dipped their toe in the water with that. So
yeah, I also associate them more with like the Commodore 64 and the Amiga and stuff like that. And Mega Drive, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, 96, that was kind of that era when, obviously the PlayStation was massive then, wasn't it?
Maybe it's going to be the opposite to the cloud. It would be called the Ocean. And everything's stored there.
I just imagine the heads of Atari listening now. There's a good idea. Let's do that. So we'll keep an eye on that. They're very interesting. And, I think maybe some people are kind of seeing that and just running away with it, but we'll see what happens. Now, the thing we were talking about then about the PlayStation, this new competitor to Xbox Game Pass they're working on right now. And the problem has been with the current hardware, the last couple of generations, PS4 and PS5, it could never run PlayStation 3 games. Because it was such a different architecture, went from, the PowerPC Cell CPU and the PS3 to x86 like the current systems run. So backwards compatibility was out the window. But I think Microsoft proved that you could do it. The Xbox One's got quite similar hardware to the PlayStation 4, and they managed to get, 360 games running on there that, again, was a PowerPC-based system. So a lot of people have been saying, are they going to actually get around to making PlayStation 3 games work on the PS5? And not only did they put a trademark, they filed a trademark earlier this month that would apparently secure, and this is a quote, backward compatibility through use of a spoof clock with fine grain frequency control on the PlayStation, which I must admit is far too technical for me to understand, but apparently a lot of people are saying that could help with PlayStation 3, backward compatibility on there.
I've got no idea what that means. Like the spoof clock bit, is it like they spoof the system using a clock? Like, I've got no idea.
That sounds right.
I think it probably means like the CPU clocks, and they're probably putting it at the right clock, pretending, and then it runs more accurately. But what I was thinking was, PS3, you could emulate, you could run PS2 games, couldn't you, in PS1?
Only the original ones. It had the hardware on board.
Oh, okay. So
release.
You don't think they'd be able to do that in software then? So that wouldn't open up a world of kind of older titles.
Well, I imagine the PS2 would probably be not much of a challenge for the PS5 to emulate. I imagine that is, wouldn't be a problem. I think the PS3 is kind of the sticking point.
The PC seems to have some PS3 emulators, though, that seem quite good.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, the PlayStation 5 is really just a PC, isn't it? So I imagine Sony want to get this working on there. They've got their team who could do it. Although, interestingly, there's a guy called Jordan Midler who he posted this screenshot on Twitter the other day. He was looking for Dead or Alive on the PlayStation 5, and a listing for the PS3 version came up on the PSN store on the PS5. So a lot of people are saying, is that kind of, are they working on that and it's accidentally appeared to end users?
Yeah, I see. I don't understand that because he put, not to panic anyone, but PS3 game shouldn't have a price when viewed on PS5. So is that because would it actually come up because it is on the PlayStation Shop, on the PlayStation Network, but it usually doesn't, those games wouldn't usually have prices on them because of they don't work on that console? Is that what he's trying to say?
You normally wouldn't see them at all. Yeah, they normally
okay.
just don't show up.
Okay, so that's weird.
They can't run on it. Yeah, the fact that it is now showing up and
Yeah.
there's a price and you can buy it.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, the other rumor I'm seeing in articles is, because PlayStation is saying, something big is coming to PlayStation this year, 2022, something massive coming. And a lot of people are saying it's them gearing up for their equivalent of Game Pass, Xbox Game Pass.
Yeah, they've got to rival that, haven't they?
They've got to rival that. I know Sony are outdoing Microsoft with sales and stuff at the moment, but that is one of the things that Xbox have got. Like, pretty much all my friends are PS5, and it's like, they're like, oh, you should play this game. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's on Game Pass. I'll check it out. And they're like, bloody hell, every game's on Game Pass. And I was like, there is a lot on there. But I feel like if they do the Game Pass, which I'm sure they will just chuck loads of old PS3 and PS4 games on there as well. Like, not to say that's a negative thing. Like, I think that's a cool thing. But, I think that'd be really good if it's just like, oh, here's a load of classic PS3 games as well, that he's played in.
But I also
years.
think they're not going to take the opportunity to not sell you your old games again. So
well, that's the thing.
There's always that price thing.
Well,
with
you're paying for it anyway, aren't you?
You're paying for it anyway with the
This
Game
is called,
Pass.
yeah, this is a thing called Spartacus. Apparently, that's the code name for it.
Okay.
But yeah, it will be like, I mean, what do you pay for Game Pass? Like $10.99 a month.
Yeah, it's like I think it's £7 a month, or if you include it with your gold subscription, it's $10.99.
Yeah, there was some for £1 somewhere as well. So.
Yeah, Xbox always do that. Like, get 3 months of Game Pass for £1.
Yep.
And then it renews, and you're like, oh, why is $10.99 going out of my bank?
Yeah, I did that. I'll sign up for 3 months. That was like, 2 years ago?
Yeah, I did that as well.
That's how they get you. So, I think it does kind of feel like PlayStation fans are always, going on about why can't I run my old games on it? Because, it kind of the opposite to what Microsoft do, where they kind of, you can run original Xbox games on the current Xbox hardware. Via emulation, obviously. But I'm in my studio now and I've got my PlayStation 3 set up here physically because there are games on there that I want to play, but I've got no other way of doing it apart from having this system set up in here. Mm-hmm. So it would be cool if you can play, some of the classics that came out on that
this
system.
Is going to be my diss of the
hardware.
new consoles. So at least you can have some games to play now, Dan.
He's
Only
not
like
wrong.
free available.
I'm literally, I've had my Xbox Series X for like a month, and I've played Castlevania Collection, the Contra Collection,
Pong.
I've been playing Katamari Reroll, which is a PS2 game, which is on Xbox Game Pass. So I have literally been playing like Super Nintendo and PlayStation 2 games on my Xbox for the last month. And I'm just like, why?
All that extra CPU power is like, use me.
Yeah, all that extra CPU to play some 16-bit games.
Yeah, we are the guys who buy a PlayStation 5 to play the best of the Atari 2600 collection.
100%.
But let's get real retro on this one now. This is a really, really cool story and something that I don't know if you guys are the same. When I saw this at first, I thought, right, this is either fake or this is like some kind of hack or something. It can't be real. My jaw dropped when I saw this. Someone has got the original Tomb Raider running incredibly well on a Game Boy Advance. And this looks, it's incredible because I did see on Twitter, even the developers of the original game were posting about it on Twitter going, what sort of wizardry is this? There's those kind of quotes.
Yeah, it's Open Lara, which we saw before.
Well, explain what Open Lara is then for people that don't know.
It was an open source version of Lara, basically Tomb Raider, and it's been ported and running on different systems. This is really interesting though, because a lot of people have compared it to the N-Gage version, which was the kind of portable one that we saw before of Tomb Raider. Do you have memories of the N-Gage one, Joe?
Yeah, I was going to mention the N-Gage version because of, some people are saying, this Game Boy Advance version isn't running as well as the N-Gage version. And, say what you will about that, but my experience with the N-Gage version is it was choppy as hell. Now, don't get me wrong, this one looks a little bit choppy, but the N-Gage version, from memory, looks slower than this one. And it had that vertical screen. There was you couldn't see a lot on the N-Gage version, whereas on this Game Boy Advance version, I feel like you know, I mean, I'm probably wrong, but you can see just as much as you could on a PS, you know, on the PlayStation version. It doesn't seem very zoomed in, whereas, you know, with that vertical screen on the N-Gage, it was so, you couldn't really see what was happening around you very far. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and this one, so MVG did an awesome video about it. It's an alpha release, so obviously it's really early on, and they're gonna do like a optimized release in the future, because this is literally the PC assets have just been shoved on there, so everything is the kind of PC, so nothing's been optimized for any stuff. It's like the original game. They've changed the perspective on it as well. So they have made it a bit of a narrower view, like you're a bit closer in, and they've obviously changed the resolution as well. But they'll change that in future, and they'll make it a bit more optimized. They'll actually work on it so the menus look a bit nicer and stuff like that. And I think they could really push it by just making it specifically for the Game Boy Advance. But this is kind of a proof of concept at the moment, and it's the alpha release. So when we see a final of this, be really good. And I think that was the same with the 3DO one as well, which was still running amazingly well. And this, to me, it shows how good a kind of open source version can be, or a reworked version of a game. So like, it's a real pity that Take-Two took down the GTA open sourced version that was coming out, GTA 3 and Vice City, you know, because like you can see it getting ported onto so many different systems and more people can enjoy it. I've got that Vice City on my Wii U as well, and that's been ported over, and there wasn't a decent GTA title on the Wii U. So, you know, I really love these kind of open source, reworked, reverse engineered games of older ones, and it's great that this Lara's kind of survived for this long without getting taken down by a company.
Well, for me, when I watched this, like I said, my jaw dropped because we've talked about it on the show before, and I know it's not the same hardware, but in terms of games that I saw on the Game Boy Advance, I always kind of equated them to like Super Nintendo kind of games. So the fact that something like this, a fully 3D rendered, and this looks like, I mean, you mentioned then it wasn't optimized. It looks like it runs incredibly smooth already. And I know they're saying it, MVG mentions it in his video, that they are going to do more optimizations to make it run even better. But looking at that, I mean, it didn't look that far behind the kind of smoothness of the PlayStation.
And that's what I was trying to say. It doesn't look massively choppy. You know, like you say, a lot of the comments are like, oh, it doesn't look smooth enough. And, you know, they're kind of having to defend it like, oh, it's not optimized enough. But, like, I think that looks more than playable, you know, in the state it's in at the moment. Like I say, I think it looks better than the N-Gage version, but I don't know. That could just be my memory failing me there. But yeah, man, it does look awesome. My only thing, and I haven't played Tomb Raider in like 20 years, the original one, is there enough buttons on the Game Boy Advance?
Yeah, I think there should be with the like PlayStation controller. But if you remember, the PC version was DOS as well. So like, I think the requirements even on the PC weren't that massively high for it. Because you could still kind of run it on DOS, but obviously you needed the graphics cards and stuff. But it was pretty early, wasn't it, Tomb Raider? So
yeah, Tomb Raider's like 95, but yeah, I mean, well, the PlayStation controller had 4 L&R buttons, and the Game Boy Advance only has 2, and then you've got 4 face buttons on the PlayStation and only 2 on the Game Boy Advance. But like I say, I've not played it in a long time, so you might not need that many buttons.
I think they've revamped a few as well. Looking at the comments, people are like, you use B to jump and stuff like that. So it might be like they've kind of reworked it a bit for the
key combos.
Maybe you press like, you know, like up and A to do something. I don't know, but yeah, they probably have done that.
Well, I'll link up MVG's video as well. It's like you said, it's really good. And he goes, really technically in depth like he always does. And, he's kind of talking about some of the, the tricks that they've done to get it running in here. Because, from watching his video, I learned that the Game Boy Advance actually has 2 different types of RAM on there. There's like a separate RAM that's on the 16-bit bus, but also there is RAM on the CPU die as well, which is quicker to access. So apparently some of the, the kind of the 3D elements of it, they've actually put directly on the CPU RAM to make it run quicker. And there's also some tricks to get like the lighting effects and stuff like that, which, just look incredible for the hardware it runs on. So yeah, I just think that's jaw dropping. And when you've got the original developers of the game going, wow, in the comments, that's a real proof that, there's a lot of skill behind this. At the moment, I think it's only 3 levels that they've got on there right now. But they are saying that they could put the entire game, they reckon, on a 32 megabyte Game Boy Advance cartridge. They could probably get it running on. So maybe the full game will be coming at some point. But
that would be crazy.
That is mind blowing.
That would be crazy if they had the entire game on there. That would be insane.
So if you want to check out the video and the article, I'll link that up in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, all of us have got, even though I don't really consider myself much of a game collector, I'm looking around now, I've got like a few shelves of Amiga games in front of me now. Obviously, I've got my Jaguar collection that I must admit, since I got my flash cart, I've been umming and erring. Should I sell it on? And, the amount of money I could earn off that. But there is something nice about having the original games. Maybe not if you run a retro gaming museum and you want to keep the games in pristine condition. Now, this is our friend Neil from RMC, who, of course, has recently opened the cave up to the public. And, I don't know if you guys have been following his blog videos when he's been building it over the last few months. The place just looks incredible. But this has actually been making a few headlines in places like Tom's Hardware picked this up as well. This ingenious system that he's got of using a Raspberry Pi to change games by scanning the barcodes on the original packaging.
I mean, I think that's insane, but I just want to comment on the fact that he's actually turned the front of the museum into like a shop as well. It looks like an old school W.H. Smith's, doesn't it?
It's
so cool.
Annoying because I went to the cave pre-shop, so I saw the whole thing, but that room was like an empty space, and then I've seen it kind of develop.
He's utilised it really well.
He's done really well, and he's like wrapped all the stuff up, and he's just got all the right fonts in there and the right kind of colour, the brownness in there of a kind of British computer store.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to get my head around this, he's kind of set up like a try the latest games like demo booth, hasn't he? Like built into the wall around the 70s wood paneling, which I love. But is it literally you pick a game up off the shelf, and he's got some fantastic games there. I can see like Resident Evil 2 on Dreamcast and stuff, some really top end titles, but you just scan the barcode on it and then it will play it.
Yeah. Well, we covered his Mr. Multi-System before, which was a kind of FPGA device, the Mr., and he created an interface for it and a way to consoleize it, essentially. Well, this is using that device, but also a scanner, an old school barcode scanner. He picks up any game, scans it, it finds the title within the Mister, launches it up after the barcode's detected it, and with Linux magic, and then suddenly you're able to play the game in the store. And I think this is a really, really amazing idea. And I just think they wouldn't have done it in the stores, though. It's good for nowadays and that kind of nostalgic thing, but they wouldn't have done it because they wanted to sell you a crap game that looks really good in the case. And then if you went and you scanned it and you played it and you're like, oh God, this is really bad, they wouldn't have been able to sell you it. So they needed a bit of intrigue and mystique around the game, I think.
Yeah, I mean...
Well, they couldn't have done this 30 years ago because he didn't have stuff like the Mister and that then. But I do think it is a very cool way of keeping these games in good condition. So I imagine, he's got a lot of these kind of wrapped up, and the boxes look immaculate, obviously, because it's like it's a museum that's very hands-on. But I like the idea that you don't have to open the box and take the cartridge out and put it in a machine, and 1,000 other people haven't handled the manual and everything. It's a good way, and it's a bit more of an experience, isn't it? Because rather than just picking something from a menu, there is a big part of it, isn't it? Holding the packaging and looking at it, and that I think that is a big part of the experience.
Yeah, it is a big part of the experience, but it really reminds me. None of us have mentioned it. Like, do you remember like the old Virgin Megastores and HMVs where you would do it with the CD and then you could listen to a track from it?
Yeah.
It really reminds me of that. But you're not wrong, Ravi, like about the crap games and stuff like that, because from what I can see, he's only got good games on the shelves.
Yeah, he's picked them well. I'm sure he's got some trash in there as well, just to add the realism. But It's really interesting how he's done it as well. It's like a Python script. It's called Barcode Rattler, and it uses the Mr. Batch controller, which is a kind of, I think it's like batch files that run on the and does commands on the Mr. And you connect to Raspberry Pi, and then you send the stuff over, and it tells the Mr. to do things in Linux. And I just think it's really smart that all this can be automated as well. Now, I don't know, they haven't got the PS1 core running amazingly well yet on the Mr. It is in development, so I think this is probably limited to like the 16 or 8-bit titles, but just the fact that you can kind of do that is really amazing and testament to him. You know, it's like on Tom's Hardware, and yeah, it's been all over the place actually, because people just, I think they just really love the concept. I think what he needs to do though is, do you remember the Barcode Battler? If he could somehow use that as an interface.
Yeah, what is it called? Like barcodes with a Z, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah. You could fight with the barcodes. If he could do that afterwards, so you pick your game and then you both fight it out. Oh, that would be good.
And even the fact that he's got like an old school barcode scanner. You know, I was a weird kid. I remember actually really wanting one of those as a kid.
Yeah,
just at home.
Yeah, I remember them as well. What you mean the barcodes is in like the little monster game? Or you just
a barcode scanner in the supermarket? Yeah,
what, just walk around scanning things?
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. My aunt used to run an off license, and she had a labeler. I remember asking my mum, "Can I have a labeler for Christmas, please?" And she didn't get me one. I was devastated.
He needs to do what they
I
have
could just
in,
see you now, Dan, when you're like 7 years old in your bedroom with a full on like Audi. Like check out scanning things in your room.
That would have been my dream.
Ripped straight out of the shop.
Well, you know, they have the beep sound on it when you know, beep when it goes by. And in some of the American ones, they have the like sonic coin collecting sound. If you could do that on it as well, that'd be really good.
Yes, when we do a road trip to the cave, which, you know, we will definitely do at some point this year. That is me. I'm straight on that barcode reader. Watch out.
Where's Dan? He's on the barcode reader.
Scanning things.
Came off it.
Now, are you guys fans of Shadow Man? You ever played that back in the day?
I never played it. It was one of those games I saw everywhere. You know, it came out on the play.
And you would like it, I think.
Yeah, it does look right up my street. You know, I've heard people say it's a tough game and it doesn't hold your hand. You know, and they say it's Dark Souls hard, but I think classic games they're just hard. They just don't hold your hand. But you know, it was everywhere. It was on N64, PlayStation, and Dreamcast, wasn't it?
All I remember is the front cover of him holding the skull. That's it. Like, I don't remember the game at all, actually. So this is all you, Dan.
Well, I must admit, I didn't play the game either. But you're right about that cover image. I remember they went hard with this. They were advertising that everywhere. Yeah. And I remember reading, you know, seeing that in music magazines like, you know, Mix Mag and DJ Magazine and Ministry of Sound Magazine. They would always have that iconic image. Yeah. Because, you know, they went very big on the advertising.
Yeah. Like you say, I remember seeing it in like my dad's magazines, you know, like in FHM and stuff like that. It was definitely like, this game isn't for kids. Like, this game is like, you know, it's for adults as well and stuff like that, you know. And it came from, is it an Acclaim game, I believe?
T-Side Studio, actually.
T-Side Studio, there you go. Yeah. There we go. But yeah, they've remastered it, coming out on it'll be out now by the time of this by the time the show comes out. It came out on the 17th of January. It's come to Switch eShop for £20 or $20. Apparently they have updated it a little bit. I don't think, was there a Shadow Man 2? I feel like there was. I could be wrong, but you know, it's an IP that hasn't been around for a long time. And I think the original was 2000, 2001, around there, maybe even 99. So it's cool to see him again. But, you know, one of the main things kind of with the remaster, obviously is they've touched up the graphics and stuff like that. But interestingly, it had tank controls, you know, like the classic Resident Evil tank controls, but they've completely revamped this into a much more kind of modern third-person kind of shooter controls, you know, probably a little bit more what people are used to these days, which I think is pretty cool. And there's a little bit more of hand holding in it. You know, sometimes apparently it was quite difficult to know where you had to go next, and there was no kind of map. Whereas I think now, from what I've read, it kind of points you in the right direction still without giving you a map. So I'm not too sure how that works, but apparently they have made it slightly more accessible. It's probably to stop people from, you know, getting gamer rage with it because I don't know where to go. But it's good to see it back, you know.
Yeah, and I'm just going to correct Teesside's in Middlesbrough. My geography's awful, sorry.
Glad you cleared that up.
I think Middlesbrough's in Teesside, the other way around.
Oh, God, no. Sorry, I need to go visit now and apologise.
But yeah, this game looks it looks really dark, doesn't it? You know, looking at the screenshots and everything. And I do know that, yeah, the impression I've got of this, and I remember seeing it around at the time. I think my friend Neil had it on the N64. He was quite into those kind of games back in the day. And I remember the tank controls and just him getting lost all the time in it. So I've got a feeling there's like a lot of maze elements on it, which, you know, it would make sense that maybe that was a big point of frustration for many gamers at the time that might need a bit of a helping hand today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely one of it. I ain't got the time these days. I'm definitely one of those gamers, like, tell me where I want to go. I just want to carry on playing the game. You know, and they're kind of like saying, like, it's sort of in the vein of, you know, Ocarina of Time, but then maybe is it a little bit more kind of like Ratchet and Clank? It's not a bad game. The reviews are saying it is a good game. It was hard. You know, there has really been that resurgence as well in the last couple of years of tough games such as Dark Souls having like that big appeal of like, have you completed this game? You know, and I don't think people will be like, have you completed Shadow Man? Like kind of thing. But it's cool, you know, to see that revamp and these old IPs getting picked up again.
It looks kind of industrial, like Manhunt-y. Yeah, kind of a Quake kind of as well. You know, maybe a bit darker.
It's definitely of that era,
stuff.
isn't it?
And I imagine it's probably one of those games that's got a big like niche fan community around it.
Yeah.
So it is cool that it is back enough for people to play an updated version of it. And I always like it when they do that, because I mean we've mentioned it before on the show. We've bought the same games so many times on different platforms from back in the day. It's nice to actually have some kind of forgotten classics, you know, from many of us to actually resurging again. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking I kind of feel like I missed out on that because the advertising campaign. Looking at it, I was like, oh my God, yeah, you know, that campaign from 20 years ago still sticks in my mind. So I kind of feel like I want to give it a try now. So
You've got to cosplay as the guy holding a skull. That would look good.
Yeah, everybody remembers the guy holding the skull and they're like, oh yeah, Shadow Man, but I didn't play it. That seems to be the common thing. So this is where somebody in the comments is going to go now, like, there's been 17 Shadow Man games, guys. You know, it never stopped. But I think there was a Shadow Man I think it was called Shadow Man Second Coming or something like that. But I think that was it, just the two. So it's cool to be back.
Yeah, and that magazine advertising back in the day definitely paid off, I think, if we all, you know.
Yeah, we all remember it.
Now, before we get into our chat all about, you know, stories from Sega and the early days of Virgin Entertainment, Nick Alexander coming up in a minute. This is a cool little thing you found, Ravi. Console watches. Now, I must admit, I'm quite a fan of watches. And these look awesome. Yeah,
well, this is also in reference to Joe as well, because Joe went to Japan, so I want to hear about his vending machine experiences. But these are by Takara Tomy Arts, and that they're like, you know, you get these little knickknacks in these vending machines in Japan, and they're pretty well designed little watches, and you've got an actual PlayStation on there, like the PlayStation original console, and then you've got like a rubber strap around it with the symbols on it, and you press a button or you press on the actual disk drive of it, and it pops up. It's got a little disc in there, and then it's got the time in the middle. It's pretty cool. What do you think about it, Joe? And I think this is called Gajapon. Sorry, I've butchered it there, which is the kind of vending machines that dispense these capsule toys in Japan.
Yeah, so gacha balls is the short version, because I'm the same as you. I'd be like gashapon, I think they're called. My wife knows all about it. She loves them. But yeah, gacha balls, they're blind box buys essentially. And you know, there's these vending machines in Japan, well, especially where I was in Tokyo. They're everywhere. You know, there's even like shops dedicated to them. You'll walk into a shop and it'll just be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these vending machines where you put your money in, and then you twist the... Can you try and describe it for like British listeners or for you guys? Like, you know, the old glass case machine, like
the gumball ones.
Yeah, you put 20p in and you twist it, and then the ball comes out or the sweets come out the bottom. They're like them, but it's these blind buy for balls. Like they're usually like from 200 yen to like 500 yen, so like a couple of quid.
So you don't know what's in there?
You don't know what's in there, but you will know what the genre is and what you can get, because there'll be a poster on the glass, you know, of the actual vending machine or behind it, and it will say like, you know, there's Dragon Ball Z characters in here, and it'll have like the 10 little plastic Dragon Ball Z characters you can get, or this one's Pokemon and there's 50 different Pokemon you can get from this one. I only did a couple. I did a couple of Dragon Ball Z ones because I love it, and I did a couple of like Pokemon ones and stuff, but my wife just went crazy, like, you know, getting watches and, you know, stuff like this. Like she got like a little Gremlins watch with Gizmo on it, and, you know, just really fun stuff. There's a big culture for it in Japan.
Well, apparently in Mega Man 4, there's an enemy that is an actual vending machine that fires out balls.
Gacha balls at you.
As an enemy. And in Shenmue as well, you can actually go around and use these little machines. Yeah.
But they are, when I say they're everywhere, they are everywhere. There's shops dedicated to them. There's you'll go into like a convenience store and they'll have a couple on the entrance, you know what I mean? And people literally, you know, they literally go and they will go, right, I want to get all 10 out of this machine, and they will just sit there putting their money in, just hoping to not get a repeat, because obviously you get repeats and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure Metal Jesus did a video, not a video on there, but he did a big video about how when he went to Japan, and he mentions it in there, and they were all trying to get them and stuff like that. So that's a good place if you want to hear more about it. But yeah, these look really cool, these little game console wristwatches that you can get in there. I mean, there's 4 of them, isn't there? There's the black Sega Saturn, the white Sega Saturn, and then the PS1, and then the original PlayStation. And I can tell you now, I'd definitely be putting all my yen in there, trying to get all 4 of them, all 4 variants. So that's how they get you with them.
And
they'll probably be on eBay for like 50 quid next week.
Yeah, more than likely, yeah.
And they've got little discs in them as well. So one of them's got like Virtua Fighter 2 in there, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, each one's got its own unique, like, because it's like the console's closed, and then you press the button on it and it will, you know, open up the disk drive, and it will have the time in there written, a digital clock in there, but it's written on like the PlayStation disc or the Sega Saturn disc, isn't it? And each one has a different disc as well. Like you say, you've got Virtua Fighter 2, Sakura Wars 2, Everybody's Golf, and Ark of a Lad. I'm not going to lie, I only know Virtua Fighter 2 out of those ones. So probably quite Japanese games, but still really fun.
Yeah, if you want to read more about that, I'll link up that article and the screenshots and everything else we talked about. You'll find it all in the show notes on your podcast app, or you can head to our website at theretrohour.com. Now we're into the new year now, and it does mean the first Patrons Hangout of 2022 is coming up this weekend. I know the last one was only like, just before Christmas. It feels ages ago since the last one, doesn't it?
I can't believe that. It's like, we're like in the 3rd week. Well, we're at the end of the 3rd week of January now. It's just like, Jesus, like, yeah, we better do a patron hangout, guys.
Yeah. So this is always, I mean, it's so much fun. This is where our patrons come on. We do Sunday nights. We always do it, don't we? Because we generally find that time works best for, a lot of our patrons are parents. So, the kids have gone to bed by 8 p.m. We just have a bit of a chat. We have a couple of hours where we show kind of our pickups. New members who come on, the initiation is also got to show their retro collection in the games room, so we always enjoy that as well. We also help each other out. I mean, sometimes we've got questions, we exchange tips and that kind of thing. It's really a bit like, we've described it as a virtual pub meeting or a virtual users group. So we're going to be doing one of those on Sunday evening this weekend at 8 p.m. if you'd like to join us for that. All patrons are welcome. And also we're going to be recording the next episode of our patrons exclusive podcast, The Retro Hour After Hours. Now, these are my favourite episodes that we do as well. This time we're going to be going back to the year 1993 and checking out some of the biggest games and the big consoles in that year. It's you and I, Joe, were talking about the other day, the amount of massive games, and, it was huge. Mortal Kombat 2 in that year, it was just a really exciting year for gaming, I think, 93.
Yeah, man. And, we don't just do the gaming years as well. We do a lot of kind of like our favourite games and favourite consoles, and a lot of kind of like top 5 lists and stuff like that. And then we've also done it where we reviewed games that people wanted us to play and stuff like that, which I think we're due another one. That must have been about a year ago since we've done that last. So yeah, we're definitely due one of those. But yeah, these are all things you get if you do support us on the Patreon.
Yeah, so if you'd like to get involved on there, all the details to back us on Patreon. And of course, it is the lifeblood of this podcast. It's what helps us bring out an episode every week. All our running costs and everything are taken care of. So we hugely appreciate your support. You'll find all the details at theretrohour.com. Okay, Nick Alexander coming up on the show in just a minute. Just a quick reminder as well, if you listen on a podcast app or service that allows you to leave a rating or a review, we always massively appreciate them. We've been looking through, actually, Ravi, haven't we, the last couple of days on Apple Podcasts. We've got some nice reviews on there. Drewster, he left one a couple of weeks ago as well. Thank you to Adunga105, Postal N, who left us a few nice 5-star reviews and some lovely comments in there as well. That was really nice to read, aren't they?
Oh yeah, it's so nice to get a bit of feedback. You know, we kind of send it out, and we have our Discord community and everyone, but it's just nice to kind of get a little review and from people that we've not heard of before as well. Keep at it, guys.
I think importantly as well with the reviews, it helps us get up the charts and in front of new people as well. So it is really valuable. Maybe you listen and you think, oh, I can't afford to back those guys on Patreon, but you want to do something else that is going to help out the show. A little review, it'll take you 5 seconds. It'll really help get us in front of new people. So we hugely appreciate them. Right then, let's get some stories from inside Sega, Europe and the UK, and some early history from Virgin Games as well, with our special guest Nick Alexander. He's next on the Retro Hour podcast.
Sega.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for the highlight of the show when we welcome on our very special guest. And it is an honor this week to be joined by someone who worked for some of the biggest video games companies of all time, including companies like Virgin and, of course, Sega as well. We're going to get some stories that we don't hear very often about Sega from a British and European perspective. So let's welcome onto the show Nick Alexander. How are you doing, Nick?
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very well, very pleased to be talking to you.
Really appreciate you joining us. Now, before we get into these, massive companies that you work for during your time in the industry, it's always interesting to kind of wind back to day one with our guests. I mean, what was your kind of earliest experience of a video game? Do you remember when you first discovered the industry?
Yes, I do. So I was at university 73 to 76, and I didn't do much sport, but I played a lot of pinball. And in my last year there, we got a Pong machine, which set the pinball table away. So it was sort of very late 75, I guess, and it was great fun. So that was my introduction.
Well, how did you start working in the industry then?
So I after university, I went to work for British Rail for a year as a fast track graduate trainee. And I thought it was going to be the answer to an awful lot of our environmental problems. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Railways are great at taking an awful lot of something from A to B and very bad at taking a bit of something from here to there, etc. So after I'd done that for a year, I joined EMI and wanting to get into the music business. And I started within EMI Group and then got a job as a planner in EMI Records. And from there, I was briefly a label manager. The only success we had in my day was Dexy's Midnight Runners, which was quite good.
Nice.
And after that, I went to work for HMV Shops as their marketing manager. And we took an awful lot of business away from Virgin, which resulted in kind of, we're getting to, I guess, 1981. So I got a call from the then managing director of Virgin Retail saying, would I go and have a chat? And they wanted me to join them. And I didn't. I felt it was sort of not quite the right thing to go to a direct competitor, really. And EMI didn't want me to do it either. So they said, well, let's see what we can find. And they'd started writing computer games for the Atari 400 and the VIC-20. And they didn't have any idea of really how they were going to market them or sell them at the time. They said, would I be interested in coming in to do that? So at the beginning of 1982, that's the beginning of my start in the business. In fact, almost exactly how many years ago is that? 40 years ago. Jeez.
Yeah, time flies.
I was going to say 30, but it's 40.
Well, obviously that, Thorn EMI computer software, later that became Creative Sparks after your time there. So you were international marketing manager. I mean, what were some of the biggest challenges and triumphs you remember from your role there?
Well, I mean, we were starting from absolute scratch. So I think so I needed to create a marketing and sales network and we focused on the United States, on the UK, and Germany to kick off with. And we were actually, I just went to look on my shelf to see if I'd remembered this rightly. But so we were producing cartridges both for the Atari 400 and for the VIC-20. So actually getting that cartridge manufacturing set up was quite challenging too. And then, so we're now in we launched in autumn '82, and the market was really just starting to shoot up. It was a very exciting period.
Well, you did go to set up Virgin Games in 1983. So how did they finally tempt you away from Thorn then? And what was kind of the story with setting up that company?
Yes. So I had started, I mean, it was, as I say, late 82, the market was really just going crazy. And I'd started to think about setting up a computer game company myself, which seemed everybody else was, why not? And I got, just as I was sort of putting those thoughts together, I got a call from Richard Branson and went to see him on his houseboat. And with his then 1-year-old daughter, Holly, kind of crawling around the floor while I was trying to be serious. And he wanted me to go and run Virgin Retail. I still didn't want to do that. And I said that I'd been thinking of setting up a computer game company. And he went, oh, yeah, well, come and do that then. Maybe you could help us with some other things. So as with many things with Richard, he has always had excellent guts. And his 1-year-old daughter seemed to like me as well. So I think I was in, and that's when I went to start there in '83. That's how we began.
So I've seen that, when I was researching before we did the interview, I was looking at, stuff on Google, and I found an image of you, Richard Branson, actually together. I think it was in the press at that time. I mean, was he quite interested in the video games industry then? Why did he want to enter the market at that time?
In honesty, he was always interested in making money and seeing opportunities. He, at the time as well, you didn't have to. If you made losses in a new company, you could relieve those losses against any other group company for tax purposes. So he diversified into a very wide range of different businesses. And he just, he thought it was an interesting thing. It didn't really have his heart, I don't think.
What was it kind of like the early days then of Virgin Entertainment, Virgin Games? What do you remember from that kind of initial period then? Any kind of
I remember the first day,
right,
sitting in an empty office and thinking, what do I do now? So I recruited two people who I'd worked with at Thorn EMI, Angela Fitzgerald and Hugh Band, who were my first two members of staff. And we started looking for games, which we did by just making an announcement. So this is kind of early bedrooms, boys, 14-year-olds writing games in the school holidays sort of time. And I can't say I'm terribly proud of any of our first products. And indeed, I have continued to be pilloried even 40 years later, one called Sheepwalk, which I thought was quite innovative because it was a sort of sheepdog trial game. But the sheep were little white dots and the dog was little black dot. But yes, so it was incredibly exciting. Having had something of a training in marketing in the music business, I was trying to apply some of the lessons that I'd learned from that. And for example, I was trying to think what the equivalent of a tour is for artists, and I sort of thought we might be able to make the programmers be stars. And so on our first product, there was sort of biocs of them and pictures, and so tried to follow that route. We got this double-decker bus, which we took around the country with the games on and would set up in playgrounds or supermarket car parks to let people come on board and play them. But these are all cassette-based games. So if suddenly the power went off, it was it had to reload everything.
Like
it wasn't
15 minutes to load in again.
Yes. But it was a period of extraordinary fun. I think I look back at that as probably being the most exciting time of my life, actually.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned about that sheepdog game then as well. It did kind of feel like, everyone was just experimenting to kind of see what worked, I guess. It wasn't as safe as it is today, where they generally stick to the known titles and franchises.
Yes, well, indeed. And in that, so we were getting programs in and paying advances to the guys who'd written them of maybe £1,000 or £3,000. You could go get an order from John Rowlands at W.H. Smith for maybe 5,000 units. You were selling them to him at £3.50 wholesale, and the manufacturing costs were about 35 pence. So, you could afford to take a few risks. Very different financial model to now.
Well, I remember being a kid and, having my £2 pocket money on a Saturday and riding my BMX to my local computer store and picking up Mastertronic tapes for my Commodore. That was a regular weekly thing. And I know that Virgin bought Mastertronic, which was a huge budget label at the time. What was kind of the backstory there then, and why did Virgin have an interest in Mastertronic?
So at the beginning of, I'll go back, so Mastertronic launched at the beginning of '84 and it really did take the world by storm, because in truth they were selling games for $1.99 that were every bit as good as the games the rest of us were selling for £6, £7, £8. So not surprising that they were very quickly popular. So everything had overstocked for Christmas '83 because a year earlier nobody had enough stock, enough inventory, neither the retailers nor the publishers. And at the beginning of '84, there was something like 500 computer game companies in the UK, and the market just collapsed overnight, and the sort of wholesale price of a game went from something like £4, £3.50 down to about 30 pence. And actually, at that point, Richard Branson had just decided he wanted to start an airline, and he asked me to go and be the marketing director of that for a year. And I took my team off computer games, or the marketing and sales people, and put them onto aeroplanes. So it took a little bit of while for the mainstream market to come back. And we bought Leisure Genius in 1986, who had the rights to Monopoly and Risk and Scrabble and lots of other games, which was a really good step forward for us. And the following year, in '87, Mastertronic had done a deal to get Sega's distribution rights in the UK. But they needed, the way that Sega operated with the third-party distributors was that you had to give a letter of credit up front, and effectively you needed resources in the bank to underwrite that. So Mastertronic came to Virgin to see whether we would be interested in buying a minority share in their company, for them to be able to buy, send a letter of credit for to take on the Sega distribution. And it was absolutely our thought that we wanted to be in the budget business, which pretty much vanished at the back end of '87. But we found that we had distribution of this thing called Sega Master System. And I just went out to CES in January in '88, beginning of January '88. And I could see from how Atari were doing over there that this actually was something that was really going to get big very quickly. Sega managed to deliver most of the inventory to most of their European distributors just after Christmas, which sort of tipped Mastertronic and most of the others into near insolvency, because the letter of credit had gone, so they paid for all this stuff, and by the time it arrived, it was too late to sell it. So that's when we ended up taking on the rest of Mastertronic and owning it properly. And when Sega heard that we were doing that, they asked us to also take on their French and German distribution, because they sort of bankrupted their French distributor, and Areola Soft, who were the German one, Justin Bertelsmann, just didn't want we don't want to play with you anymore.
Yeah.
So by mid-'88, we were their main distributor in Europe, just as everything started to burst through and grow. So it was luck and a little bit of judgment, but mainly luck.
Yeah, very well timed. I mean, like you said, then the budget games market was starting to decline around then. And I mean, how much of an issue was, particularly on the home computers, was piracy a big issue for Virgin? Because I know when kids at school discovered you could copy tapes in your mum's stereo system, that changed a lot of things for a lot of people.
Yes, of course. I mean, Pirate Action, I was involved with getting computer software covered under the Copyright Act in about 84, 85. And we started something called Federation Against Software Theft. So it was an issue, but as the quality of the games and packaging and the market grew, it became less of one. But of course, for Mastertronic, if you got something nicely packaged, you paid £2. Why were you going to pirate that, really?
Well, then Sega took over Virgin Games. Then, so I mean, what do you remember about the merger, and how did your role change there?
So, because Sega continued to insist on everything being paid for up front, and because it's not a secret, but Virgin never really had any cash. And when the company floated, they were in the city. Richard was described as always being fully invested. So as soon as he got any cash, he sort of invested in something else and grow that. So we were really starting to struggle to be able to fund the products, particularly hardware purchases, that we needed to make if we were going to capture the market growth. I think in 90 we took on Spain as well. We were working closely with all the other European distributors. And it really seemed to make sense from everyone's point of view that Sega buy Virgin out, so that the credit issues would then go away, and we could really focus on actually selling stuff as well at increasingly lower margins on hardware, which as a third-party distributor, you just go, well, I'm not going to do that. So in terms of my own role, it didn't really change that much, except I probably got to see my bosses more in Tokyo than in Notting Hill.
Well, obviously, I mean, Sega being a worldwide company, and the Master System, I remember a lot of kids at school having it, but then we have guests on from America, and I know that the Master System was a much bigger success in Europe than it was in the US. What was kind of the reasoning for that then, and how did the markets differ, between Europe and the US and Japan? Was it quite varied?
So having being at Virgin, we always thought in terms of not appealing to little kids, but to teenagers and their elder brothers. So we really positioned Sega as being right from the outset. So, and I know we kind of stepped it up later with the Mega Drive, but as being a kind of cool thing rather than something that Mummy and Daddy did sitting around with young kids. Whereas Nintendo were very, very family orientated. So I think in Sega America, really, once with the Mega Drive or Genesis, as it was called, they decided that that was a good strategy for them too, and abandoned the sort of kiddie one. Then their business really started to grow as well, and that markets became more similar. And the only difference in Europe where those things weren't the case was Germany, where there is a very different culture. I mean, German kids, certainly then, I believe it's probably still true, play with Lego much longer than in any other European territory. Parents are much more concerned about violent games. A lot of games that were great successes elsewhere were banned in Germany. So Germany was our least successful market in Europe and Nintendo's strongest. And I mean, actually, Sega America had a bigger share than Sega Japan did in their home territory. And I think that Sega Japan was absolutely fantastic at product development, programming, and having the rights from their arcade machines. But I think Virgin and Sega Europe were actually much better at marketing And I think as more experienced and wiser marketeers like Tom Kalinske got involved in SOA, that they started to take a much bigger share than Japan as well.
Well, I mean, here in the UK, who did you see as your main competitors? I mean, what was it mostly Nintendo? But obviously, you had stuff like the Amiga and the Atari ST. Were they considered a challenge?
It really was Nintendo, and so having come from the computer game side myself, we all would sit around and talk to one another in the industry about why do we keep making bigger and more expensive and more complicated games, which only smaller number of people have got the hardware that can utilize this, and you're losing a huge part of the market because lots of people get frustrated, and so actually the reason I think why video games came back so quickly was you had products that were really well tested beforehand. You just plug them in, plug and play. Very straightforward. They look nice. You didn't need to spend days trying to work out what you were supposed to be doing. So we really didn't feel that the computer software publishers were our competition. It was very much Nintendo.
Well, the Mega Drive came along, and obviously that was a groundbreaking system. How did you approach marketing that then?
Well, in exactly the same way as we had done, but it was it was a bigger, better, cooler system. And I had an extraordinarily talented marketing team who'd come to work with me at Virgin Mastertronic. Philip Lay, Simon Morris, Jim Heitner, and a guy called David Joseph, who was actually one of the juniors who kind of went on to be a massive figure in the music industry. And they were a really extraordinary bunch of people. The first three of them ended up going to Sky after I'd left Sega, and kind of making Sky a much more mass market product. And they've gone on to do lots of other fabulous things since. So as we got to that stage, I was leaving, quite rightly, them to get on with their marketing bits. But it was like we wanted to be appealing to somebody who looks like a 20-year-old. And if you think that your older brother thinks it's cool, then even if you're 9 or 10 or 11, you're going to think it's cool too. So it was a much better, and if your parents don't quite approve, that's even better.
Aspirational, wasn't it?
Well, entirely, yes. And then sort of making sure it was very noticed, long ads, kind of quite powerful, and bringing production values to the TV ads in particular that just nobody had been doing at that point.
I mean, we've had stories on this podcast from, Tom Kalinski's been on. We've had Al Nilsson on as well. And talking about, Sega of America's sometimes strained relations with Sega of Japan. I mean, what was it kind of like in the middle, the European division fitting in between them? Is there any kind of memories that stick in your mind from relationships with America or Japan?
Well, I didn't feel that we were between them. I think that SOA and ourselves, Sega of Europe, we're very much in the same mindset and having to deal with a lot of the same problems. And I'm trying to, there are lots of little factors in all of that. But I think that Sega Japan really felt that they were mimicking Nintendo a lot of the time. They as I said earlier, were absolutely fantastic with product development, but they really weren't very good at sales and marketing. And I think that we and Sega of America were really singing from the same hymn sheet, and it did get very frustrating at times.
Did you make many trips out to Japan then regularly?
Oh yeah.
Any memories that stick out from your visits?
3 or 4 a year. Amazingly, I'd been to Japan once many years before. And I had been there for 30 years. One of my nephews lives in Tokyo, works in Tokyo. And I went to see him, I guess 2 years ago before the pandemic. And it was the first time I really enjoyed going to Tokyo. Forever. And it was very work orientated. It was, I can't say I enjoyed it. The food was great. And we were certainly taken for lots of nice meals. but they really didn't like letting us out of their sight very much. And so we'd go out for dinner in the evening, finish about 8 or 9, and then we'd have to get on the phone to Europe and start acting on the things that we'd been talking about during the day. So I remember those trips as being completely draining and not something I look forward to.
Well, let's get back to, marketing the Mega Drive in the UK and Europe. And I remember, in the UK, the TV adverts, they stick in my mind from when I was a kid, Sega Pirate TV and the Cyber Razor Cut. Every kid at school wanted one of those. What was kind of the story behind those campaigns, and where did those ideas come from?
So really, by that time, Philip Lay and Simon Morris were driving the marketing campaign forward. We had a WCRS were our ad agency. It was exactly the same positioning as what we had been going for from the outset, but with a bigger budget and on a greater scale.
I remember that, they just stick in your mind, though, that they were really, really powerful campaigns. And the fact that, I can remember them clear as day 30 years on proves how effective they were.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what was kind of the gaming industry like in the UK during that era? It must have been quite an exciting time. I've heard stories from other guests about the legendary in-dins, the industry dinners that were held. And,
yes. Well, it was an enormous amount of fun. As the 90s, it became a much bigger and more serious. But we were, in the early 80s, we were all kind of making it up as we went along. As you said, yes, some time back. And it's just, it was, you knew everybody. It was a very small business, and live hard, play hard, work hard. But it was, I still have a large number of friends from those days, and I'm right place, right time, and my goodness, what a lot of fun it was.
Were there any launches that you went to that you remember?
And I think so. The first launch that we did, we got a Mrs. Thatcher lookalike. There might be a picture of that with Richard Branson pouring a glass of beer over her head. And we did it at the Roof Gardens, which was, I think probably still is owned by Virgin. And that was very glitzy. But actually, when sort of going to all those other trips, as the launches got more and more extravagant, I was working harder and harder. You can't even know. And you'd have a meeting with SAJ, so say around CES either in Vegas or Chicago. It's I've got to be up in 2 hours. Yeah. So I think I better try and go to bed now.
Well, how closely was Sega working with third-party developers and companies? Were you giving them much help?
So this was one of the issues that I had with Sega Japan. I felt that the more third-party software there was, the harder it would be to make sure that your products, your own products, are being stocked widely. But Japan was very keen, again, sort of very much focused on inventory risk, that they would make the third parties buy the product from Sega Japan. But I kind of slightly got in their way, because they gave licenses to more third parties. I'd then do European distribution deals with them, which sort of meant that we didn't lose control of pricing and a range of titles and all those other bits and pieces. I think that one of the reasons why video games were so successful was because there were relatively few titles, and they were all very well executed. And I think, exact opposite of what computer software was in those days, where there were hundreds and hundreds of titles, trying to get anybody to know which they were. And frequently, 2 weeks after launch, they'd have to be recalled because there were bugs in them, and everybody was kind of rushing stuff out all the time. And actually, the discipline that cartridge manufacturer imposed on the market really was very helpful to, I think, improving improving the experience for the consumer, and that's to a very large extent why the computer games were dipped down a lot in terms of volume of sales, and video games took their place and built a much wider audience too. But also that you just so the process that you had to go through in order to, because you were having to place orders for manufacturing the cartridge software 3 months up front. So, and Sega Japan wouldn't let you start to manufacture it until their testers had torn it apart. And again, having been on the other side of the fence, you go, I'm not quite sure what this, but we're going to miss the launch date, which is 3 days' time. And so by the time we're pushing out discs of games or CD-ROMs, where the manufacturing times are very, very rapid, you weren't able to do it until it had been properly debugged because the manufacturers through Sega Japan just wouldn't let you.
Yeah, that quality control was there, wasn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, obviously Sonic came along, and no pun intended, he was a real game changer.
Yeah.
How did you approach marketing Sonic initially then? And did you see that from the outset? Did you see that this was going to be a real change for the Mega Drive?
I think from the first reception, Sonic was even on the Master System was one of the most successful characters, if not the most. So Sonic 2 coming along really was Mega Drive sales were just going crazy and sort of ramping up, and that was a good lead title to go out with and to work around, and even generalist journalists who didn't know much about video games at all. It's cute character, quite fun, and it's cartoony. Not unlike Mario, it had huge appeal. So it was clear that we should get behind it and make it our lead title. And I do remember Sonic Tuesday extremely well. We did a big launch down in the basement at Hamleys, where there was a sort of Sega arcade had been built down there. Not just for the occasion. And we were moving to new offices actually just then. So we'd been working in rather higgledy-piggledy buildings around Notting Hill, and lots and lots of little outfits. And we were moving into that rather large building on the corner of Earls Court Road and Cromwell Road, which is not a building I was fond of, and it was a move to become much more corporate, which I tried to resist. But so after the Hamleys launch, we went to take some photographs sort of outside our new building with the ad agency, and I remember I got a ladder, and I can't quite remember what I was holding, but I sort of was at the top of the ladder with this Sonic 2, which I was trying to cut out, which I was trying to attach to the outside of the building. And I do remember as I stood there thinking, I bet it's all downhill from here. So the next morning we went back to our existing office, and outside the front door, I still have no idea how it got there, was a toilet bowl. And I just thought, okay, not sure what point's being made.
Time to move. That campaign with Sonic Tuesday, from memory, I think that was the first kind of example I remember of a global launch. Was that kind of hard to coordinate? Obviously, that was kind of the pre-internet era. Was it a difficult thing to make sure in all countries it was the same?
Well, we didn't. It was a global launch date, but the campaigns weren't the same in the three territories. So my issue was trying to make sure that all of our European countries were following, and we did. We had faxes then. So everything was by fax. And that in itself was already a huge improvement on telexes, which are what we were using before the fax. So that wasn't so tricky. And it was really the product availability was down to Sega Japan. And they did us proud.
And I guess, even telling retailers, because I mean, I imagine they had to get stock in early. Was it kind of you told them you can't sell it until this date and hope they wouldn't kind of break that rule?
So we didn't let them have it till a few days beforehand, and some of them did break it, but most of them didn't.
Well, the biggest buzzword, in that era, kind of 91, 92, was that CD-ROM, when that came along. I remember reading so much about that. What did you think of the Mega CD?
It was very much an interim product. So I think in I can't remember when, it might have been 90. It might have been early 93 or 92, and we were having a sort of tripartite meeting with Sega America, Sega Japan, and ourselves, and it was clear that the 16-bit boom was starting to turn, or we were close to the very top of it, and that something else needed to come through. And the 32-bit machines weren't really ready to go. And the Mega CD was a bit of a kind of halfway house of having something to launch. And in truth, it wasn't a terribly successful product. And it was expensive. I think it probably was a slightly weird concept for some people. And I actually, so we'd also identified globally that we needed to diversify. And one of the ideas that I took to Japan was that we could buy Thames Television, which was up for sale at the time, still has a massive range of back catalogue. And I thought that if we could use that as to give us a unique product flow and enable people to have much more than just CD-ROM or CD-based video games, but actually CD entertainment, video entertainment as well, and at the same time. And actually, Sega Japan, they really didn't go for that at all. They go, yeah, we want to diversify, but not out of video games.
Right.
Okay.
Because that would have been, that was what DVD became, a decade later,
yes,
wasn't
exactly.
it? So, yeah.
Yeah. And indeed, Pearson, who ended up buying Thames, was who I went to work for after I left Sega. And I think they've got themselves an extraordinary bargain there. It's probably one of the best moves that Pearson made. Better than Software Toolworks.
Well, I remember first seeing a Mega CD in my local game shop, and the fact that you could, see, even though it wasn't full screen, and it was, maybe about a quarter of a screen, a video playing on a games console that was real. That was just, you can't explain it to kids today how mind-blowing that was, but it was. I mean, you'd never seen anything like that before.
Absolutely. I mean, it was extraordinary. So Night Trap, which actually I don't know if I tried to play it. It was terrible, but it was vaguely entertaining. And I think that was sort of the Daily Mail sort of ran it shock horror pornography on video games. Have you seen it? Oh, I mean, it was like an episode of Doctor Who. It was about as pornographic as that, which is not very. Yeah,
we've had the developers on this podcast before talking about it, and yet it's very tame today when you play it.
Goodness! Well, there's even tame for it today. I mean, it really was.
Well, I mean, I do remember that game making the headlines. The fact that it was, I guess, the first adult game, and then there was also that, and there was Mortal Kombat as well that I remember on the Mega Drive that had blood. And on the Super Nintendo, it didn't. Did that cause much controversy in the press? And did you kind of like that? Did it help sales of the Mega Drive having this controversy around it?
Of course it did. And it's a jolly good game. And but in Germany, so as I was saying earlier about different market, in Germany they did a version even for Sega that didn't have blood, because that would have been banned under the youth protection laws there if it had. But and of course it's again entirely played into our market position of being the cooler, more grown up brand rather than the kiddie one.
Yeah, all those headlines in the press, the kids just looked at it and thought, right, this is so cool. We need to get hold of one of those.
Yeah. But I have a Mega Drive as well, Dad.
And the dads are normally, we'll get one.
Yes, of course.
So I remember, when the Mega CD launched, famously there was a TV advert that took up an entire ad break. I think it was like 2.5 minutes long, which was just unheard of for any product at the time. Never mind a video games console. What was kind of the backstory with that then? Do you remember much about it?
Well, I just, possibly the less amazing the product, the bigger the marketing campaign has to be. And I don't think we played it very frequently. I think we bought a few spots, long spots for it. And I really, it is a very long time again. I can't remember how many, but it was just, you use your marketing to then drive a lot of PR off it. And that's what, with all of those ads that we've been talking about, that was a lot of the idea, was get the media writing about it, in the mainstream media rather than just the specialist media.
Well, were you surprised when Nintendo dropped out of the CD-ROM race?
No, I think they were very sensible. It was, the technology wasn't really ready for it, and we should have been focusing on our knitting, really.
Well, speaking of revolutionary systems, the Game Gear, which
the economics were disastrous.
Right.
Absolutely disastrous. So we were selling the Game Gear hardware at something like 10% below the price that we were buying it from Japan at, and that's before charging any shipping costs, overhead, marketing costs, anything to it. So we were starting every time, we were losing sort of £10 a unit before we began, or before we even shipped them from Japan. On Game Gear, on handhelds in general, you sell far fewer pieces of software to the amount of hardware. So with a standard video game in my day, we'd sell 6 cartridges, for every piece of hardware that was sold. And while you were making a tiny margin, or just covering your costs on the hardware, razors and razor blades, there was a big margin on the software, and that's where you could make your money. But with handhelds, you get maybe 2 or 3 games most, for us, and we couldn't begin to compete with the Game Boy because it was just in a completely different price bracket, and the battery life was a nightmare. And I think it was 6 AA's, and they'd last a couple of hours. So that's the running costs were huge. Now, I like the idea that we had a TV tuner that you could put in it, but the more that we sold, the more that we lost, and so I'm deeply unenthusiastic, and so that was certainly a big issue with Japan, because they kept saying, "We need you to sell more." I can't afford to.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're right there, because I remember, everyone I knew that had a Game Gear usually played it plugged into the wall, which kind of defeated the object of a handheld.
Yes,
system,
exactly.
Really, yeah.
Exactly.
Did you see the Atari Lynx as much competition?
Well, so again, I would have done if we wanted to be in that marketplace, but they were potentially more competition. But actually, what we really needed was something that competed head on with the Game Boy, because that's where there was a mass market.
Yeah, and about those software sales, I remember so many people the Game Boy was just a Tetris machine. That's the only cartridge they ever had for it.
Yes, well, so that going back, they might have had one other if my two sales of software for every piece of hardware is right.
So were you much of a gamer yourself then? And because I know we've talked to Tom Kalinske, you mentioned he's still got a Mega Drive set up in his basement, and he sneaks down there to play a bit of Sonic sometimes. Were you much of a gamer, and did you have any favourite Mega Drive titles?
So in honesty, not especially. So I remember when I first got an Atari 400 for work at Thorny MI, and there was a game called Caverns of Mars, which I really, really enjoyed. And then I'd play strategy games, but not really shoot 'em ups or Twitch games or so. And I'd found that when I was previously in the music business, I stopped really enjoying listening to music, and it took about 5 years after I left to start enjoying listening to music again, because you're looking at things in a very different light. But so I play the occasional game on my phone these days, but that's really as far as I go.
Yeah, I guess it's that old analogy of a chef probably doesn't go home and cook in the evening for fun. It's you have to do all day, yeah.
Indeed.
So you mentioned you left Sega in 1994. Why did you decide to leave then and move on?
So at the time, everybody was very excited about multimedia, and it seemed to me that there was an opportunity to take different sorts of media assets, like magazines, and would have been DVDs, but actually the launch of DVDs was delayed by a couple of years, which was because it was CDV, wasn't it, before?
Yeah, video CDs. Yeah.
So I put together this plan to create a male special interest publishing business, focusing initially on print magazines and CDVs, hopefully growing. But of course, as soon as DVDs were announced, it killed the CDV market. But the magazine bit was very good indeed, and Pearson were the people who were most interested in financing it, and that led to us buying Future Publishing, who I'm sure you know very well, and it was a great business. It was so much more sensible a business than anything else I'd worked in previously, because you could just you could launch a product for maybe £250,000. And if you get it right, you could sell it every month for years to come. You could license the content overseas, and whereas with games, particularly by that stage, it was low millions rather than tens of millions the production budget. You put everything out on day one, it either sells or it doesn't. Back to the drawing board. So I really liked the magazine business, and it was funny that so 3 years later, Marjorie Scardino, the new CEO at Pearson, came in and decided to focus the Pearson business on educational publishing, which I think has been shown not to be perhaps the best of ideas. And it amused me enormously about 3 months ago to see that the market cap for Future Publishing is now just slightly less than that for Pearson.
Yeah, because I mean, at that time though, it's magazines were king, weren't they? Especially kind of pre before everyone had the internet, is just the way you found out about everything.
Well, so of course it was, and they really do seem to be monetizing. I mean, Future today, being able to monetize the online aspects of it. I saw they bought one of the big price comparison engines. And let's go, that's a smart move. So I just, it had what it gave you with magazines is a relationship with the reader, and a kind of unique, trusted trusted older brother or good mate in the pub or something, and that. I mean, it's taken a while to find the right ways to use that relationship and to extend it, but clearly that Future Publishing are doing an extraordinarily good job at doing just that.
100%, yeah. They do Retro Gamer magazine as well, which focuses on what we do, which fantastic read. Well, obviously, you left Sega behind. I mean, what was because you were there at the most exciting time, I think. Yeah. I mean, what was what are you most proud of about your time in Sega then, looking back?
Well, I guess the launch of Sonic 2. I mean, that was which kind of crossed over so broadly. I mean, I think we were on pretty much every TV broadcast or in news bulletins. Like the BBC 6:00 news, and it was just. I mean, that way it was extraordinary. But then you've got to come back down the ladder.
Well, Nick, it's been incredible reminiscing with you, and thank you so much for sharing your stories.
No, not at all. Pleasure.
I mean, what are you up to these days? What do you do today?
After Pearson, I had a sort of portfolio career, and I worked for as chairman of lots of little companies, and Natural Motion, who were bought by Zynga 7 years ago, were one of them. And actually, when that got sold, I thought I'll just retire now. So I've had 7 years not doing any work at all, and I love it.
Sounds well deserved.
Well, I'm certainly enjoying it, and whether I deserve it or not, I appreciate it.
Well, Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your stories.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.